Hello everyone, welcome back to another lesson with Rivera Fine Art Studios. Lately I've been getting a lot of questions about how I lay out the structural planes of my portraits. So I figured I could take this drawing, which I did from life, which is semi-finished, and show you how I would go about finding the planar structures of the face. So I will be doing this kind of in the reverse of how I would lay out the drawing, just to show you again the really strong plane changes and how I'm observing those forms. And this is a very conceptual process, meaning that I have to really think about the entire form that is sitting beneath the flesh as well as the hair. So I will be talking about the anatomy of the skull a little bit, but I'm going to put more emphasis on really the planar structure and how we can start to break up those planes. So I'm going to do a smaller version of this drawing over here, and I'm just going to kind of quickly sort of break down some of the shapes of the skull. And I'm doing this in a very simplified way, so I don't want to get caught up in a lot of detail. I just want to look for just really basic forms. So when we're looking at the skull, we can break that up into the shape of the cranium and the shape of the mandible. There's two very distinctive forms that kind of divide the skull up, and that's the cranium and the mandible. So right there, I've just drawn out the shape of the cranium. And one thing that we want to really look at in this drawing is how much space we have to the back of the head. So if we're even thinking about dividing this up into front and side plane, the division between the front and the side plane happens right about here. So pretty much where the shadow begins right here at the cheekbone. That's actually the widest part of the front plane of the face. And then everything moving back this way becomes the side plane. So there's really a lot of depth to the cranium, and most people, when they're just starting out, they'll kind of miss that. And I could kind of take this a step further and just think of it in terms of planes. And if I did that, all of this would really be my side plane. And then I only have about this much here of my front plane that's showing. So that's something that you really want to pay attention to from this angle in particular. And if you're interested in more in-depth content on this subject, then I would recommend checking out my online school. And the website for that is www.riverafineartstudios.thinkific.com. And I'm actually going to be running a sale on all of my classes this week, starting this Sunday at midnight, and that's going to run for a full week. So that's going to run until the following Sunday at midnight. So all of my classes will be 50% off during that sale. So something else that I'm looking for now is sort of this lower part of the face, which is the jawline. And I'm kind of imagining as though the hair is not covering the head. So I really want to sort of think about, the shape of the cranium back here. And even if I was to take it a step further and add the neck, that would attach to the base of the cranium and angle out this way. We get this basic cylindrical shape, which makes up the neck. And, then from here I can start to, even at this point, divide up my planes. So I'm just going to do a really quick charcoal lay-in to kind of make this a little bit more obvious. But again, I have all of this, which really becomes, this is all my side plane right here. So just going to throw that down into some shadow, and then from here I can even start to look at certain features. So I have this sort of concave shape that sits in here. Okay, so that really sinks in, and that actually becomes, that's a place where I can find the temple, which is the edge of the forehead. And then I can start throwing in some center lines here. So I have a line for the eyebrows and another line for the eyes. And I'll usually try to put those in pretty early on in the drawing. And the other important line here is going to be the center line for the nose. This divides up the two halves of the face. And I'm sure we've all, anyone who's had some experience with drawing, you've worked with this concept of center lines, but it's really important to understand how we can make that work for the drawing, and really use that to guide ourselves. So when we're looking at lines, in the beginning stages, I go with very sort of angular lines, straight lines. I work with a lot of horizontals and verticals. And I'm really looking primarily I'm thinking of these lines as being kind of the architecture of the face, if you will. And a lot of this is, you can kind of find different anatomical parts of the skull using these lines. But in a more basic way, what I can start to do is really analyze my planes, right? So if I'm looking at something like the nose, for example, it starts right at the center line. So this line that I put down, which divides the two halves, my nose angles out from that point. So now what happens as I put this in, what's going to happen is my center line is going to change, because now I'm starting to take into account that there is a planar structure that's moving off of that line. So when I'm looking at something simple like the nose, I can really divide that up into a series of, in this case, 3 planes that I'm seeing: front plane, bottom plane, and side plane. And even taking this nose and just kind of looking for some other things, I can find some additional planes here that come off of the nose. This actually sets up my eye socket right here. We have the glabella, which tilts down. So this is a down plane. We have the nose, which tilts outward. So that becomes a plane that's facing out. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just putting in a little bit of value where I see these distinctive plane changes. So looking at something like the nose, we have the bottom plane here. Okay, so that's falling into dramatic shadow. We have the side plane, which is falling into shadow as well. And even if I was to remove the eyeball from the eye socket, what would happen here is all of this would fall down into shadow as well. And that would tell me that the eye is sitting in a socket. And then what I can start doing is I can grab my eraser here and I can start to soften edges and finesse the form to make it look a little bit more organic, even at this stage. Okay, so I have enough lines in place where I'm starting to think about the architecture of the skull and the features. And I can slowly but surely start to soften these forms now and make it look more like a human. But even as I start to flesh this out, I want to be very, very aware of my planar structures. I don't want to lose sight of that. Okay, so I'm going to keep going back and kind of re-emphasizing some of those planes every now and then if things become too soft. If the forms don't look quite like they have enough structure, I'll go back and I'll look for those planes and start to add them back into the drawing. And it's really this constant back and forth between finding those planes and then softening them and then finding them again. And to me, that's really what the whole process is about. Same thing with edges. We kind of sharpen edges and soften edges, and that becomes a large part of the drawing process. Okay, so now I can adjust this little bit of the eye socket. I went down a little too low, so I can bring that up. And I can even start to pick out some additional forms. So I've kind of gone with my my primary and my secondary structures, and now I'm kind of looking at the details. So things like the eye sockets, for example, that would be a secondary feature. And then the actual eye is a tertiary form. So that sits within this socket, and the socket, or the eyeball rather, is a sphere contained within a socket. So if I don't understand the shape of that socket first, it's going to be very hard to place my eye. Now I can see that eye sits in there within the socket. I have a lot of a side plane to that socket right here. This all falls into shadow, right? But I couldn't understand that shadow shape very well unless I had the shape of my socket placed. And now I can kind of darken this a little bit and start to add some additional values to break these forms down a little bit more. And I can kind of go back now too and say, okay, so here's my cheekbone. It kind of happens right at the base of the nose. I think of this sort of being in the lower third, the base of the nose, that cheekbone, and then that brings me right into my my tooth cylinder, which sits right about here. And this is a form of the skull that juts out, kind of moves out this way. So again, this becomes an outward plane right here. And you can see how this stuff is pulling away from my my original line. So my original center line was right here, right? And I'm going to just mark in red now what I'm starting to do. So I started the nose right on that original center line, but I pulled that out that way. So that becomes an outward plane, shifts back in as I hit the bottom, and then I get to the tooth cylinder there, and that becomes another outward plane, and then I drop below that, and it shifts back in that way. So now those planes are really starting to alternate, and I can just start taking my time to really shape out my features now. Okay, so once again, if this is something that you are interested in learning more about, I do offer all of this content in much more depth on my online school, and that address once again is www.riverafineartstudios.thinkific.com. And I currently have 3 classes on that site. I'm about to add a 4th, and all of those will be 50% off next week. So if you're interested, I have one class which breaks down the anatomy in much more depth. I go into similar concepts to what I've been doing here today, and that's the beginning class. And then I have a charcoal and pencil class where I talk about rendering values using a combination of charcoal and pencil, and that's really for more intermediate level. And then I have 2 classes on there which talk about laying chalk, different colored chalks on tone paper. So if you're interested in incorporating a little bit of color into your drawings, that class would be great for students who want to do that. So again, a total of 4 classes, and I will post the link in the description below. So if you're interested, just click on that link. And if you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be posting more videos on a weekly basis. Every Monday, I'll be putting out a new video. Hope you enjoyed this presentation, and hope to see you in a future video. And in the meantime, happy drawing and painting. Thanks for watching.